Welcome to LaunchPad Lab's MegaBrain series, the webinar series which gives you an inside look into collective wisdom of our developers, designers, and product managers, the heart and soul of LPL. Each episode introduces you to one of our product builders who will share their insights and expertise on a given topic, with the opportunity to ask them questions and pick their brain on the subject. In today's installment, we'll be hearing from Andrew Sass, a senior designer who's been with us for over 2.5 years with a deep expertise in all things design. He's going to share his knowledge and insight on search.
Love it. Thanks, Monique. Cool. So thanks all for joining. Today, I'm going to be going over a conversation on the UX of search, essentially just types and patterns for better experiences all around. So I think a lot of us, when we get started with search, we think, oh, it's just an input field and, it's going to spit some data out to me. But as we'll talk today, you'll kind of see there's two different flavors of searches, and you can find out which one might be best for your product. So to kick off really quickly, just wanted to go over the index, starting off with some intro/influences as far as where we're getting some of the search information, as well as how that works at LaunchPad. Go over the different search types. Next, we'll touch the anatomy of a search, the 3 different experiences that can be associated with a search, location, user feedback, and then the last one, just going over how we can incorporate a great experience into your specific product. So when you know how to use search and which one might be the best for you. So to kick things off, this is a quick quote from Geoffrey and Peter Morville of Search Patterns, a book out there, essentially saying search is a defining element of the user experience. And unfortunately, it's also a source of endless frustration. It's the largest or worst usability problem on the web. And I see a lot there, I think, especially now in today's world where AI and search is even advancing further. Search is one of those things within your product you're really going to want to nail, whether that be a faceted or federated search that I'll get into later. But definitely a key aspect into any platforms online or a product that you're shipping to internal users. So quickly, before we get started, just wanted to go over some influences. I think fortunately for us, we live in the day and age where there's a lot of great companies out there that document a lot of that information. So one thing that I would say for anyone that's even further interested in search or patterns collectively within UI and UX, taking a look at things like Materials by Google, really great documentation around searches, other experiences as far as shaping an experience for your products. IBM Carbon Design also has a great system where they documented a lot of different instances within their platform. And last one that I want to touch on is just iOS and Apple. So obviously they have all of the components themselves, but they also break down when to use them, how to use them, and use cases for them. So just wanted to start off there, as that's influenced some of the conversation we'll have today, as well as kind of give you a guiding or jumping off point as well if you want to dive a bit deeper. So to start off with the search type. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I think a lot of us look at search as it's an input box. It's going to spit some data out to me and I'll go from there. But as you'll see in the 2 different search types I'll be discussing, that's not necessarily just the case. So the first one is called a federated search. This is a technique essentially of searching multiple data sources at once. With a federated search, you're basically going to retrieve that information onto a page from a bunch of different locations. And then a user can kind of scroll through, paginate, filter, all of that good stuff. So when we think of a federated search, the biggest and baddest one, I guess you could say, would be something like Google. Kayak or any of the online kind of travel agencies also utilize this a lot, where they're pulling in different flights from APIs, different hotels, different car packages, things like that. So that's kind of where a federated search works. And then also, one more to touch on would be something like Instagram. So not only are they searching across like accounts and things like that, you're not just looking at users though. So they have things like places, tags, audio. So essentially you're just gathering that information from a bunch of different places, and you're going to retrieve that for me in one interface where I can scroll, find what I'm looking for, and move on from there. So the next search that I want to go over, which is the one that we probably think a little less of when it doesn't necessarily have to be just a search box, would be a faceted search. So this is also known as faceted navigation or faceted browsing, primarily used in the e-commerce world, where users can essentially organize all of the information, do a quick search potentially, and then filter upon that. So for something like e-commerce, it would be size, color, price, and brand. Outside of that, it could be something for folder structures, things like that, where a user could find a bit more detail of what they're looking to get. So Jumping over to a few examples. So these two on the right are from eBay. So let's say you did use a traditional search box in that sense where you search, Nike Air Force Ones, but within that faceted aspect or faceted type of search starts to come into play when you're actually filtering on that. So you could have filtered or searched initially on Nike Air Force One size 12. If not, you can filter upon your shoe size, the color, pricing. You can sort it by lowest to highest, ending soon, newly listed, things like that. As well as New York Times here on the left. So the initial search box is here at the top, but they also have things like suggestions, meal types, diets, things like that, where you're not necessarily engaging with that search box, but you can initiate those essentially on a faceted type of navigation or search experience, where it'll give you that jumping off point right off the bat, where you don't actually have to type any information. Another really great example of that is Pinterest. I utilize Pinterest a lot as a designer, definitely like to find a lot of inspiration there, but they do the similar thing where I have that global search bar where I can search across and do a federated search where, I'm going to pull a combination of all these things into one interface where I can browse. If not, I can also do, recent pins that I've looked at, recently viewed things, or as they have this new filter or faceted type of navigation at the top, I can see more ideas on things that I've looked at previously. So in this case, I was looking at UI, UX things. So I could click on that in more of a navigational aspect, while it's still running that query and searching for me and spitting me out to a results page, just like a search would. Another great example of that, as mentioned, not necessarily just looking at this through the lens of a search box, but faceted navigation in that perspective. I could certainly go to IKEA and type in home textiles or chairs, things like that. But within a good navigation, that can also be a great aspect to the overall search and findability within your website. You don't necessarily have to just have that search bar for these kind of experiences and components to take place, when a good navigation and overall site hierarchy can certainly help with that experience as well. So next, let's just hop into the anatomy of search. So for today's conversation, we're going to focus a little bit more primarily on actually engaging with a search input field. So with that being said, there's a few things that will go into place for this. A little dependent if you're using a mobile experience or a desktop, but there's always going to be an icon, the input container itself, so we're actually going to engage, the prompt text, so kind of telling me what I can search on, a clear button, so if I've started to type things, just giving me quick access to clear that, and then more of two optional ones, again, very dependent on one, the product UI you're actually going for, as well as if you're doing a mobile or web kind of build, but a search button can be optional, and then a cancel button as well, as I'll kind of show in the next screen here. So jumping into the anatomy, kind of just breaking these down a little bit more. So starting off with one, the icon. So at this point, a magnifying glass is universally recognized as a sign, and users will search this out. So if you are going to support the level of a traditional search, definitely don't skimp and not utilize the search icon button, because that will be something users are very familiar with, and they will kind of seek out and look forward to utilize that in their experience. The next one is just the input container itself. So again, this is very dependent on the UI. If you're doing a global search, you want users to see this very broad, as I'll kind of share in some examples later. The size of this can kind of be dependent on what you're going for and how much you think users will actually engage with that search bar. Next one will be your prompt text. So again, kind of knowing the search type you're utilizing, as well as what are you offering your users to search for. So at times you can see some very vague, like search anything, for instance, because something like Amazon or Target has that capabilities. But for smaller products, you want to be a bit more prescriptive as far as what users can search on. If it's a table, for instance, and they can only utilize, 2 columns for the search, just being descriptive on saying, searching first and last name and not giving them those other options, just so they know what experience they can expect when engaging with that actual input. Next one would be a clear button. So as you can see here, again, just kind of utilizing a quick experience for users so they can clear this quickly versus kind of highlighting and having to delete, just giving that ease of use from that perspective. Next one is the search button. As I mentioned, very much so optional. This one's kind of changed as we've evolved within just utilizing web experiences and stuff throughout our whole lives. But now a lot of buttons are just using return or enter for users to actually engage and run that search. You can always add the search button if you want, but that experience has started to change as people are much more familiar with just hitting enter and expecting that query back. And then the last one here is more of an optional for a web experience, but the cancel button itself. So if you were in a mobile experience and you're going to utilize a search, it might take up the whole page. So just giving users kind of the out. If they no longer want to engage with that search, they're kind of abandoning that. just giving them that opportunity to go ahead and jump out of that and scroll back through the app there. Cool. So now I want to jump into a couple experiences. There's about 3 different breakdowns that we'll go through. I'll also touch on kind of when to use these and why to use those in those certain use cases to help you kind of further understand what might be best for your product. So the 3 search experiences are essentially a basic, which we're all probably going to be very familiar with once I go over, an active search, and then a targeted search as well. So to kick things off with a basic search, so a basic search is just how it kind of sounds, very similar to that Google experience. So a user is going to look for something and get a specific page of results. So just to make this really easy, essentially, we're just going to take them to that page where it's paginated. They can filter more, as well as just kind of get through that page a bit more and understand what's coming back to them for that search. So essentially, when to use a basic search is 1, when searching is really expensive. We all know search can be one of those resource intensive and very costly products. So if you're trying to live search, you have a bunch of data, it might slow you down, things like that. You certainly don't necessarily want to be actively searching upon that. So the best time to use a basic search is when you want to just filter that information, give someone kind of a choose their own adventure opportunity and land on a results page. As mentioned, when searching slow, so if you're going to try to do a type ahead suggestion or search through an input box itself as they're going, if that does render and make the page quite slow, you might want to look into a basic search just to make sure that those speeds can stay up. And then the last one is when information is really unfamiliar for users. So if they're coming into something like, for instance, again, Google, you could be searching anything at that point and users might not necessarily know exactly those results they're doing. So instead of trying to find those results in a little panel box underneath what they're typing, giving them that whole page to kind of explore, understand more, filter upon what they're actually looking for is another great reason why to incorporate a basic search into your product. So a couple examples of that. Here are a few from, I want to say this is New York Times Cooking, Hulu, as well as another platform where essentially they're not going to give me that information of what I'm searching for, like any results, until I'd actually engage. So very traditional type of experience where I'd click on the search box, type whatever I'm looking for, go ahead and hit that search, and then be taken to a results page. So at this point, that gives me that flexibility of go ahead and utilize filters and things like that later down the road to even fine tune that search experience for users overall. The next search I want to go over is an active search. So just like it sounds, essentially an active search is just a quick way for someone to look up something in an app or data set. So as soon as someone starts typing, we're going to start rendering some of those results or querying those results for them. So it's a live type essentially where we're not going to load a page per se. There isn't really a total page search experience. This is going to happen in a little dialog box where they can see things as they go. So if you start to type t-shirt in, for instance, on the e-commerce site, it might not be the best experience because there's probably quite a lot of t-shirts on there. But if it's something much more specific and users kind of know what they're looking for, a great opportunity to utilize something like an active search as well. So the biggest thing on when to use active search, like I mentioned before, when data is limited. So if you're not going to have to load a ton of information in this dialog box right away, great opportunity to make something really speedy, as well as giving people what they want kind of right away in that aspect, and they can continue their journey on with your product or website. And then another one is just when users know what to look for. So if they're familiar with the content, they kind of know what to expect. Another great opportunity to utilize something like an active search because they came here for a specific reason. We have a small data set that we need to share. They can find it relatively quickly and kind of move on with their day. So that is the breakdown of an active search. For instance, here is one on Gumroad, a site very similar to like a Shopify, where as you can see, as I'm typing ahead, I'm starting to get some of those results. So everything is with the tag of design, but I can see here, I'm not actually getting a page loading my information or having to hit enter. I would go ahead and get all of those results if it's a small query set within the actual dialog box. So I can jump right into the experience I need and get down the road. So cool. And then the last one to go over would just be a targeted search. So kind of a mix between a basic and an active search. This one's a little bit tricky to explain without some visuals, but essentially this is great for like a huge catalog of information. If you have subsections, thinking like a Notion, a help center, things like that. It allows you to expand the search outside of maybe just the general product someone's working in right there. So with an example, we'll actually just jump ahead a little bit here for Shopify, but let's say I'm utilizing within Shopify's admin panel here. I'm looking for customer, wherever that might take me to a tab or whatever specifically in this product. But it's also going to give me opportunities to look outside of this. So yes, I'm querying or searching on the data, but it's not necessarily housed directly in this one. So I can see Shopify admin here, store results, and then starting to get outside of the platform I'm currently utilizing. Things like resources, expert help, as well as things like, the Shopify App Store, Help Center, all of that good stuff. So jumping back really quick, just when to use those targeted searches. Again, like I said, within a product suite. So if you're using like a Dropbox and you have a lot of data being pulled from different sections, great opportunity to utilize something like a target search to give people the opportunity to not have to necessarily leave the product they're in and search another place, where you can just kind of query all that information and give it to them right up front. Cool. And then jumping into more of the experience. So now that we know those general search types, I wanted to go over some of the experiences that make it much cleaner for users to use. So first one here would be just location. So generally when you're utilizing a search bar, a traditional search bar from a input type of field, just display that search prominently. I think one of the most important best practices is just making it really easy and noticeable. This kind of depends on the product and what you're looking to utilize. If you're expecting a lot of users to engage with this, then you're probably going to make it even larger, but kind of just depends to tailor to your product and what its needs might be. Next one would be just avoid using just an icon. As I'll share in an example after this, but users are expecting to see this, and if they're going to utilize it often, they're going to want to see a big input box and understand that it is an opportunity for them to utilize. Sometimes when it's hidden behind just an icon, it might get lost next to notifications and everything else in the navigation. So making sure that it's very clear for users to engage with. And then the last one would be just be consistent with your placement of that. So if it is a global search, it should probably be a navigational item that will be consistent across all pages. If it's just table sets, just depending on where you're utilizing those in your product, just be sure to always have them in the same place for each table. So it could be the top right corner, just so that expectation is there for users when they're actually going in to use certain pages. So here's kind of the first example of that. So don't hide your icon behind or your search field just behind an icon. As you can see, things can get a little lost if you have call to actions up there, if your notifications bell has a few things underneath it. It's just harder for users to understand like, hey, search is an opportunity for me at all within this product, as well as where do I find it? So just being very clear, giving it the space it needs, and again, being very prescriptive as far as what that prompt text is for users so they know what they can search upon. Next one, just an example of one kind of out in the wild. Again, back to IKEA. Since IKEA is obviously search is a huge part of what they're utilizing, it's quite large. You can see that, what are you looking for at this point? It's giving me that engagement where I can kind of search upon anything. They do a bit of a targeted search as well, where they're going to give me some results, as well as give me the opportunity to go to a full page and view them. But again, if you're going to offer that, and IKEA definitely leans into utilizing something like a search bar, just giving it the real estate so users know it's there, how to engage with it, and then kind of move forward from there. Next one, very similar. Shopify has a similar experience where that search is a global type of aspect. So giving it, again, that real estate so users know that they can utilize it if they need help right away. It just gives them one more kind of safeguard to find what they're potentially looking for. One more here as well, just kind of keeping it consistent. If it's a navigational item, even if it's inside navs and dropdowns, that opportunity can still kind of be given to have the real estate, understand what they can look for, and move forward from there. Cool. One more experience would just be around user feedback and how to make that a bit more important. So first thing, kind of 2 rules of thumb within that is just provide suggestions for no results. So avoid leaving users with like 0 interactions they can take when they get to a results page. So if they did, for whatever reason, query a page where there are no results, give them kind of an out. So for something like e-commerce, you could look to show similar items or other things that people have been searching upon. If it's a web app or just a product itself, if there's no data found, try adding instructions and even potentially a CTA if applicable, just so they can kind of start a new search, filter upon something else, or look in a help center without just giving them a blank screen so they're not quite sure where to go from there. And then the last thing as well is if there are no results, or kind of showing what that search page can look like, is just injecting your branding and personalization within it. So just to enhance that brand equity and brand awareness overall, consider infusing some of like your icons or your image or your personality of your overall brand within that experience. So even though users are in a scenario where, you know, they don't want to be at a no results type of page, it's a bit more fun and a bit more playful in that sense, where they get an idea of who the kind of product and team that you guys are building. So starting off with IKEA again, say I search something, surprisingly, IKEA doesn't have something called something. So they tell me the results really quickly that I have 0 products and any content results there. But essentially what they're giving me here is any related content. So I'm not stuck necessarily. I can always go back and re-engage with this search, clear my item out and try again. Or it's giving me a jumping off point. So try something new. There's a few keywords in here that are directly associated with what I searched for. But they could also show like recent products or things like that that people are searching upon at this time. Another great example is Mobbin. So this is a site that essentially just shows a bunch of different user interfaces that we can utilize for research and things like that. But if I search for something like search empty states, they actually didn't have any options to show me. So gave me a quick description of what happened, a little instructional text around that. And then again, that CTA. So I'm not necessarily stuck here. I can always start a new search, which will just engage my search bar again. And I'm not just looking at a screen and not kind of knowing where to go from there and giving users no out in that sense. The next couple here, first one would be for Hulu. So Hulu, again, kind of just giving an empty state. If I searched my downloads and there was nothing there, it's telling me that. It's also utilizing an icon, so I kind of understand what's going on. Waze has another cool one where, again, starting to inject more of that brand personality within it. Uber Eats does that as well, where they can be a bit more playful with the actual icon, as well as copy can always be your friend as well. So if you want to make sure you're very prescriptive and descriptive as far as what users are going to get out of this, as well as supplying that CTA for them to kind of get going somewhere else, so they're not necessarily at a dead end within your product or app. And then one more for Asana. So this is more of like an internal type of product, but again, if I search something and nothing came up, they gave me a little bit of their branding from the aspect of the icon, gave me a quick header text, an understanding or instructional text around what went wrong, and then the opportunity to do something about it. So I have a CTA to go ahead and edit that search, retry, and go from there. All right, and then lastly, we're going to get into the section of how do I get a great experience for my specific product. So I think this is where a lot of questions come in. Now that we know the different search types, we don't necessarily know how to inject that into our specific product. So to start, I'd say at any point, whether you're at the beginning of a project or at the end, just getting to know users and stakeholders really early in this process can always break or provide clarity when you get down to requirements and usability. So understanding what people might actually want to search on or which search experience makes sense based on the product you're building or the type of catalog or data that you have access to is certainly a great place to get going. I'd say next, listen to the data. So this one is also quite huge in the sense of if you utilize something like optimal sort or maze and do a card sorting exercise, it's a great opportunity to align everyone and understand like, hey, you know, we think we need this global search, but after hearing this, you know, it sounds like we could get away with more of a faceted type of experience, start with filters and then scale from there. So it gives you a good opportunity to understand like, hey, if we're on a tight budget, we can utilize a type of search experience, just making sure we're utilizing the right one and using our resources in the right places. And then the last one I would say is just know when to push back. So again, it's very time consuming and expensive to do search potentially, specifically if you're doing a global type of search. So informed by all that data that you gathered within card sorting, you kind of have that backing now to push back if we don't necessarily think we need this feature right away, or we can do a pared down version of search. Great conversations to have, and having that data, again, knowing what users are looking for will always kind of help sell you down the road in that sense. So with that being said, that is kind of what I have on search, the overall experiences we talked about, as well as some ways that you can start to engage and inject that into your own products. But yeah, any questions?
Thanks, Andrew. That was a great deep dive into search. Now we have some questions that we've collected from the audience. So let me jump into those. You kind of touched on this at the end of your presentation, but when does it like ultimately make sense to introduce a search feature into a product?
Yeah, I think ideally, The earlier the better, like certainly kind of just knowing the scope and generally what kind of search you'd look to have is great. But if it's one of those things that does happen midway through, I would say just knowing what you're looking for out of that search experience, kind of aligning everyone, because there are different search types and they take different, development expertise and time and expenses and things like that. Ideally doing it at the beginning, but regardless of any time that you try to inject that, just kind of having more of that data back decision on which one works for you and kind of why.
Yeah. So search features can be so robust. I know we've seen from all your examples. How do you know where to start and how quickly to build it out?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of touching on it, but search, I think we all kind of think of the traditional, like, hey, here's an input box. Generally, I can search upon anything. We've all gotten a little spoiled with how good some experiences are out there where there's an expectation for search to kind of do it all. But I would say like just utilizing maybe what works best for your product. Just because global search is used elsewhere, it could actually be a worse experience for your type of product based on what you're offering. So for instance, if you don't have a large data set or something like that, a filtered opportunity could be great where you can do more a results type of page where you can give them more of a choose your own adventure type of experience. But with that being said, I would say I would certainly look to just have search grow alongside what your product is doing. So start smaller, understand what users actually need. They don't maybe necessarily need that global aspect right away, but giving that flexibility within the components you're designing and the overall product vision, where search like down the road could maybe get to that much of a robust type of level.
Yeah, absolutely. And even things like introducing like recency of like previous searches could get interesting depending on, repeat users or visitors. But yeah, the landscape is so vast. And then last question. So there's been obviously a lot of talk recently about the advances in AI and Chat GPT. So what like impacts do you see this having on the way we design and build different search experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think LaunchPad internally, we've certainly had a lot of conversations around that because that is kind of the leading technology at the moment. I think two things for me would be, I think search will get much more conversational in that sense where maybe not as traditional where I'm typing very robotically within it. I can kind of have a conversation with it and it's going to curate and guide me through that experience. So right now, I think our search results kind of just spit out a page. They're generally what we're looking for, but maybe you don't think outside of, oh, I searched this, what else might I be interested in? I certainly see AI coming into place where it's like, hey, you search for this, but here's also a spit out maybe of like it talking to us in the sense like a Google Home or Amazon. As well as just being much more conversational because it has the capacity to do so, where search maybe will feel a little less interface heavy and a little more conversational as far as like what that data or whatever it's kind of querying back to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Exciting stuff ahead, right?
It really is. I think it's a scary and very exciting world. But I think it's only positives as far as like the overall search experience will probably just get even more like seamless and quick for users. So
Yeah, great. So that sums up the questions from the audience. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, Andrew, and thank you for sharing all your knowledge on the UX of search with us. And that concludes this edition of the LaunchPad Labs MegaBrain series. Be sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date on upcoming episodes and other think pieces from our team. So yeah, thank you.